Good evening, friends and brethren. It's good to see you. Glad you are here. Again, I see several visitors tonight. We're glad to have you. Happy that you are here. The lesson tonight is one that I hope to be very simple. The last couple of lessons have been ones that you have to really work at, follow, and a little more difficult. This is an easier lesson. At least that's the plan. If this is not a simple lesson when we're all done, then I didn't do a very good job. But that's the purpose and the intent tonight. I want to begin by telling you a story about a trip in Africa. As I mentioned the other day, I've made several trips to Africa, preaching trips. And most of the time, those are for 3 weeks. And somewhere along the middle, I try to plan a day that's just a down day, because by that point, we really need it. We just need a break. We need some rest. Doesn't always work. We don't always get that, but that's the plan, at least. I have 2 travel partners in the recent years, Steve Klein and Tad Corder, a couple of preachers. Steve's about my age, and Tad's a young man. He's 40. But when he started traveling with us, he was 34 years old, and Steve and I both kind of thinking, at some point, we're going to get a little long in the tooth for this work, and we need to have someone that's going to be ready and prepared to kind of take over when we can't make these trips. So we got Tad. And also, he's real good at carrying our bags. And so that's helpful, too. Oh, side story real quick. One time we were out in the bush preaching for 3 days. We're staying in tents, of course, and some of the brethren there had provided stretchers for us, is what they call it, like a cot. And as we're setting those up, Tad sat on his, and it just broke, and he fell to the floor. And so he folded it up, and we got an extra blanket, and he slept on the ground. It was pretty rough, pretty hard, and it got cool at night. And on the 3rd morning we woke up, Steve and I are both sitting on our stretchers on each side, kind of looking at each other and talking a little bit, and Tad kind of rolled over, and he says, he says, if your stretcher had broke, one of your guys says, I don't think y'all could make it sleeping on the floor like this, on the ground. I looked at Steve, and he looked at me, and he turned and looked at Tad, and he says, Tad, you need to understand, if one of ours had broke, you would still be the one sleeping on. Sometimes we have fun traveling together, but it's a lot of work, but it's enjoyable, and there's been some good things that's come from it. I think we've grown more than anybody else has, really. A couple of years ago, we had planned in the middle of our trip to spend a night at a place where it was a refuge kind of camp for animals. And I had been there once before, several years before, and it was kind of in the middle of where we were traveling. I said, that's going to be a good place for us to stay. And when we go, we can walk with the lions. And Tad and Steve were going, what do you mean walk with the lions? And I said, well, we're going to get up early in the morning. We're going to go out on a bush walk with some guides. And there are some lions that were born in captivity, but they don't know it's captivity. And they're going through different stages, and they're going to be returned to the wild. And so the plan would be about 6:30 in the morning, we go out and we walk with these lions. And about 18 months old and about that tall. And it's just an interesting experience to walk along with those lions and with the guides close by. And you learn some interesting things in the process of that. But when we got there in the evening, and our goal was to get some good sleep this night and to get some good food and rest. But we got there and they said, would you care to see the feeding of the older male lions? We thought, well, okay, that sounds just fine. We'd be glad to do that. We didn't really know what that was all about, but we understood feeding and old lions. And so we thought we would be glad to go and see this done. And so they put us in a Jeep, and they carried us around the way and came to a large fenced area. And it was there that, and in fact, the fence was 12 feet high all around this front side, and it went way on back over this hill. I don't know how far it went. And there were no lions in there. And we stood around in front, the 3 of us, and the guide says, they'll be coming, and a couple of other people that were there. And they said, you need to be ready. If you want to take photos, you got to be ready because they'll come very fast. And so we tried to get ready for that and to be prepared for that. But what he was explaining to us is that when these lions come, they're very hungry. They've not eaten for 3 or 4 days. And I mean, we're accustomed to eating 3 or 4 times a day, and many animals do that, but lions don't. They only eat every 3 or 4 days. And so when it's time to eat, they have a powerful hunger. You know, they are ready to eat. And so I just imagine the hunger pains must be pretty intense about that time. And what we witnessed when those lions came out would, I think, confirm that, because they absolutely tore their prey apart. And it was a memorable moment what happened there, and it caused each one of us to reflect. There were some things that we talked about right after that, and being preachers was interesting. We all started thinking about the same thing. And Steve commented after this event took place, he says, I bet I know what all of us are going to preach as soon as we get back. And we agreed and confirmed that we were going to preach about that incident. And I don't know what Steve and Tad called their lesson, but I called mine, Beware, Hungry Lion. There were some real life lessons to be learned here. There's some remarkable similarities between the hungry lion and Satan. And Scripture makes that point abundantly clear, but still it seems that we are not too inclined to think about the danger that is presented by Satan, and that's a mistake. That is wrong for us to not understand who Satan is and what his intentions are, what he wants to do. And being up close to those hungry lions, it enlightened my senses in many ways. And so I'll share this with you. There was the prey. There had to be food for the lions to eat. And right there in front of the fence, they had us positioned right in front of this fence, and they came out in a jeep and they dropped off the prey, which was a dead cow. That was the prey. The lions didn't have to kill it. It was already dead. That does not in any way diminish their sense of hunger and their desire to tear that prey apart. And so as we're standing there waiting, we keep waiting for the lions to come. And the guy, they will come. They will come. And we're kind of waiting. We have our cameras ready, but all of a sudden someone said, here they come. And all of a sudden, there they were. They just came out of the woods, and it was like right now, there they were. And then they were right here, and they were right here, and they were right here. And it just happened that fast. There they were, and they were tearing the prey apart. And when I say that it happened real fast, I mean it was just like this. I mean, I should have had my camera like on speed shot so I could have just clipped off a bunch of pictures, but I was clicking as fast as I could. And they were here, and they were here, and they were here, and they were right there in front of us. And when they came up so fast, they kind of bounced off of that fence, and we were standing just right there at the fence. And it bounced and it clanked, and we all jumped back. And someone let out a girl scream. I think it was Tad. At least that's my story. But it had our attention. Absolutely. I mean, it happened just that fast. And the prey, the 4 lions tore it apart. I mean, there was no one saying, oh, you have this piece. Oh, no. They ripped that thing apart, and they went off their separate ways to chew and to gnaw on that prey. And this one, I had kind of bounced over here when I had landed. This one walked over here and curled around and laid down there right in front of me and looked at me. Now, I'm not sure what that look meant, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, for real. And it just looked at me as it was licking on that dead cow. It liked flies too, evidently, because it just licked those too. And it just looked at me. And it just looked at me. And it growled. I don't mean a big growl, but it was just a low growl that said like, I double dare you to take this away. And it was just the most interesting incident there as that all came about. And it all happened so fast. I mean, I don't know what we were expecting, really. I mean, we hadn't expected to do this at all. This was just kind of an add-on for the night. And I'm not sure it helped us to rest anymore. But it was so interesting, and I'm glad we got to do that. There are some lessons learned. Satan is like a roaring lion. Scripture tells us that. And yet somehow, I just think we don't get it. That we don't understand how real that is. That we think somehow Satan in the background of our life, or maybe more so in our life than what it should be, as though it's not that big of a thing, it's not that big of a threat, that he's really not going to hurt us. Let me tell you something. God said he's like a roaring lion. I have a better idea and impression of what that is and what that means. And let's understand that Satan attacks aggressively. That's what Satan does. Please don't be fooled. God told us, he has warned us. There are several passages that you're going to see tonight. Please turn to them. We're looking at 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Yes, I know, we know this passage. But it took on a new meaning to me. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, the Apostle Peter says to the Christians, he says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The passage is very descriptive on how Satan works, but I'm afraid too often we just kind of ignore that. We don't take the warning. We don't take it seriously. And many of us don't even give time to think about what Satan can do to us, and there's no fear. But I'm going to tell you something. If there was a lion in front of you or coming at you, we would have fear. I promise. I promise we would all have fear. God says that Satan is like a roaring lion. And the implication here is that we should have fear. Why do we think God used a metaphor such as that? Because it's something that we can understand. It's something that we can connect with. Satan is fast. His attack is unexpected. He is stealthy. It seems like sometimes Satan just comes out of nowhere. It's kind of like those lions. We were waiting and waiting and waiting. We kept watching back there in the bush. There was nothing. And all of a sudden, there they were. And there wasn't time to turn around. There wasn't time to run. You could try, but you'd make it about 2 steps. Satan is like that. You know, part of the effectiveness of a lion is causing his prey to fail to realize that they are being watched, that the lion is close by. Satan's like that. Kind of sneaks into our life sometime when we are unaware. When we're just not thinking about some things in the way that we should be. A lion's prey is seldom aware that he is around until the lion is ready to pounce. One of the most effective ploys by a lion is to encourage complacency. I mean, maybe the prey will see the lion from time to time. In fact, the lion may spend several days stalking its prey, but he's not acting like he's stalking. You can watch National Geographic and learn some of these things. And then when that lion gets hungry enough and has maybe picked out the most vulnerable of the animals, he's ready to move. The roar of a lion is something that's very distinctive. If you hear a lion roar, you don't say, "Was that a lion?" Oh no. You know that that was a lion. And sometimes the roar is debilitating to its prey. Sometimes when a lion runs after a herd of animals and he lets out that roar, there's some that get confused and they even kind of split up, which is exactly what he wants. The lion is not trying to kill the whole herd. He doesn't need to. Just needs that one that stumbles. Just needs the one that turns away from the safety of the rest of the herd. Just needs the one that's a little bit slower than the rest. And he has his prey. It was kind of an unnerving night I had one time in Africa. We had been traveling in Zimbabwe for a couple of weeks. We were heading back to South Africa. And we were just extremely tired, but we got across the border into South Africa. And we got to this ranch where we were staying the night. It was a hunting ranch, and it was all fenced all the way around. And we got to these little cabins that we were staying in, a very small little cottage. Each one of us had, the three of us each had a separate place to stay. It wasn't much more than a room with a bed, but he was tired. I didn't care if I had a bed. And we got in there about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had just laid down. And there was the roar of a lion. And I sat up in bed, and I knew exactly what I had heard. Now, there was supposed to not be lions on that ranch. And I'm sure it wasn't. But it was loud enough that I just got pretty uneasy. And so I came back over to that little sliding door where I came, and I made sure it was closed. And I locked it. And I went back over to the bed, and I noticed that the curtains were blowing over top of the bed. And I got on top of the bed, and I was going to close the windows, and realized that there was no windows to close. It was just open. So I closed the curtains. Yeah, I know that didn't do anything, but it made me feel better. But the roar of that lion was so distinctive and so unnerving. Satan's purpose is to destroy, seeking whom he may devour. That's what a lion does. I saw it tear that cow apart in just seconds. And do not think otherwise. Satan will devour. Satan will destroy. That's what he does. He does it well. And it's almost like that lion that is just hungry and is ready to just tear apart anything he can get a hold of. And that's what Satan will do. Proverbs chapter 30. Will you go with me? Proverbs chapter 30. Interesting passage here that maybe sheds just a little bit of light on what we're talking about. Proverbs chapter 30, beginning of verse 29. There are 3 things that are stately in their stride, 4 that move with stately bearing. A lion, mighty among beasts, who retreats before nothing. A strutting rooster, a he-goat, and a king with his army around him. Focus on that lion. You know, there is a reason he is called the king of the jungle. And all the other animals are concerned and scared about him. A mighty lion does not retreat. And we think of the likeness of Satan. His boldness, his willingness, his desire to destroy, his intention to tear away our faith and to take us to places that we know we don't need to go. Satan attacks aggressively. And if we think anything different than that about Satan, we are wrong. God teaches us that Satan is aggressive. We need to understand that. Sometimes Satan can look harmless, kind and gentle. I have some really cool photos of those lions we walked with. The ones that were about 18 months old, about that tall, had paws bigger than my hands. And yet when we walked among those lions, they seemed pretty harmless. But we were in a group of 15 or so, all walking real close together in a pride, kind of like lions would. And as long as we were together in that pride, those lions just walked in among us. Go over, jump on these rocks, run through the bush, circle around, come right between us. We would rub their backs as they went through. Just as harmless as could be, it seemed. And I have some pictures of the lions when they jumped up on a rock, and using a telephoto lens. Looks like I was real close to them. And they're quite pretty. Kind and gentle. At least that's kind of how they looked. But we can be fooled into believing that a lion won't harm us. But I can guarantee you that they will. We are food, and we are prey to them given the right circumstance. And we are prey to Satan. And we need to understand that just like we look like food to a lion, we are food to Satan. And we have to realize that Satan is our adversary and that everything Satan represents is a trap. To try to pull us, to try to lure us in. He is our enemy. And Satan is looking to tear us up. And he will do it when we are most vulnerable. He's going to look for those times when we're just not expecting. Maybe when we are weakened because of whatever circumstances in life. And if we leave the strength of the group, we are easy prey. We're looking in the Psalms. We're looking in the Psalms, the 17th Psalm. The 17th Psalm. And David has some insight here. David has something to say. We need to realize again that Satan is our adversary. He is our enemy. He is looking for a time when we may be vulnerable. David knew something about being attacked. He knew something about being the prey. There were different times in the life of David where there were enemies that were doing everything they could to destroy him, to take him, to tear him apart. And in this text, this prayer of David that we find here, he's turning to and he's looking to God. He's saying to God, I'm calling on you, Lord, please answer me. And he's talking about the enemies that just surround him. And in verse 10, they close up their callous hearts, and their mouths speak with arrogance. They have tracked me down. They now surround me with eyes alert to throw me to the ground. They are like a lion hungry for prey, like a great lion crouching in cover. David understood. He knew what lions did, and that was part of the analogy. That's a metaphor here that he's using. David knew the feeling of having an enemy close by, an enemy that had surrounded him, a hungry lion hiding and searching for unsuspecting prey. Is doing the same thing to us. Satan works with his servants to surround us, to overwhelm us in his ways. And there's nothing kind about the way Satan works. His objective is to overwhelm our thinking. His objective is to destroy us. His desire is to destroy any spiritual inclination that can be found in our hearts. And he does so by surrounding us in his ways, surrounding us with his servants who make ways of evil sometimes look really good. Makes ways of evil look appealing to us. But again, the reality in verse 12, they are like a lion hungry for prey, like a great lion crouching in cover. That's the way Satan works. That's a description of Satan. Our only hope is in the power of Jehovah God. That's our hope. That's why David was praying to God. Verse 13. Rise up, O Lord, confront them, bring them down, rescue me from the wicked by your sword. O Lord, by your hand save me from such men, from men of this world whose reward is in this life. David was right. And David was right to turn to the Lord for help, for strength, for protection from those who are trying to destroy him. David's plea was simple. It was, save me. Only God has complete power over the evil one. And when we are facing those days and those times when Satan is winning in our lives, the only way he can be overcome is by the power of God. When we turn from the evil one and we turn to God, seeking and asking for his help. And then the third point. Satan intends to kill and destroy. Let's get a good picture of this. Let's make sure we understand this. He is not looking to just scare us. He's not looking to injure us. He's looking to kill. Satan's goal is to kill, to destroy hope, to tear us away from hope in life that is found in God. He's not trying to just harm us. It's amazing how the king of the jungle, how it can, on one hand, look so kind and so gentle. And for days we might even be near the king of the jungle, and he offers no evidence or desire of a desire to kill us. But the day will come. If we play close enough to the king of the jungle, the day will come when we will be his prey, and we will be the victim, and only we can be blamed. Because we put ourselves in harm's way. Don't be fooled that Satan's intention is to separate us from the safety that we find in God, to separate us from that so we can be attacked. That is what Satan does. There is safety found with those with the same purpose, those of like mind. We find safety there. We find help, we find encouragement, we find support when we are close to those of like precious faith. You know, when walking with the lions, I was saying a few moments ago, it's kind of a weird thing when you think about it. When I got home and told Sandra, well, we went walking with the lions. And she says, what? What are you talking about? And I tried to explain. She said, I don't think this is a good idea. And I said, we already did it. You know? Some things you just do and ask forgiveness later. And this is not a good idea, you know, she says. But the instructions from the guides was very explicit. The need of staying close together and to being a part of the pride. And we were all also issued a very big and heavy stick. And, you know, we went through this without any problems, without any incidents. As long as you are walking with those with similar objectives, you find strength and comfort and safety. That's literally how that works, walking with the lions. Well, look, there's a spiritual analogy here. If we are going to walk as a Christian, let's understand that there's a whole lot more danger if we're trying to do that all alone. Because Satan has his eye on us. Because he knows we are alone. We don't have help. We don't have support. I mean, we are the one that he is looking for. And so there is power, there's help, there's hope, there is safety walking with those of like mind. To do otherwise is to be influenced or to be distracted and not looking where we should. Because we help each other to look the right way. Sometimes we warn each other when there are dangers, and we should not be upset. When a brother or sister comes to us and says, I'm concerned about you, or how are you doing? I've noticed you've not been in services, or there seems to be something on your mind. Are you troubled? This shouldn't upset us. It's something that we should be thankful for, because that's the blessings we have in Christ together. That hope and security and safety and support that we have when we are together. Satan is trying to take us and draw us away from that because he knows he has the upper hand then. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Consider what the apostle is saying. Trying to lift up and encourage disciples to be focused. To be able to see and to understand what our walk in life should be. Therefore be followers of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. Then there's a warning. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather the giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes on the sons of disobedience, and do not be a partaker of these things. our strength and power to overcome attacks by the evil one is decreased. No, I said it wrong. Our strength and power to overcome is increased when we walk with those of like precious faith. When we choose to separate from those focused on spiritual things, we open ourselves up to the eyes of the enemy. When we choose to be separate from those who are focused on spiritual things, we are in grave danger. And so often it is those who don't see or understand the danger. And that's when we are most vulnerable. When we stray from the support and protection found from those of mutual faith, we become that vulnerable. And I suspect that's why Peter had those words to say of those of like precious faith in 2 Peter chapter 1. I've thought of that so many times, this phrase, those of like precious faith. It's what we share. It's what we are able to do with one. We share that with one another. We encourage each other in that. And there's kind of a predictable scenario. The older I get, the more obvious this is. Faith is diminished when friends in the world have greater influence than those of faith. And you can see sometimes what is about to happen. It even becomes predictable. And we might see that among ourselves sometime. We see sometimes when there are those who seemingly their faith is not all that it should be. And over time, sometimes it seems that their faith is becoming less and less all the time. And if we try to get close enough to them, we see and we realize that it's not those of like precious faith that have the greatest influence on them, but it's those outside. That there are others who have influence and who are drawing them away. Again, can I say, we should not be upset if a brother or sister comes to us and says, you know, I'm kind of concerned about you. It seems like you're acting different lately, or we've missed you at services, or you seem troubled. If they have seen or detected something in us that is a change in that way, we need to listen real careful because they might really be correct. They might be seeing what we don't even see in ourselves. And we need to listen to them. And it's a predictable scenario, I'm telling you, that those who spend less and less time with those of like faith are putting their faith in jeopardy. And even tonight, we may very well look around. I don't know. You know the folks here. I don't. I'm just barely learning your names. But you can look around among you tonight, and you know people that aren't here. For some, there are justifiable reasons, I understand. But there are some whose faith is not all that it should be. There are some who are being influenced more by what Satan has to offer than what can be found with those of like precious faith and what God has to offer. And if they stay in that scenario, I know which way they're going. Unless there is a change of heart and a desire to be connected and closer to God, I know which way is. I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. But I know which way it's going. And you do too. And sometimes we need to take those eyes and just look back at ourselves. And ask ourselves, to whom are we the closest? To whom are we most connected? I said before, a lion does not attack, typically, a whole pack of animals, but goes after the one weakened and one that's not in the whole group, one that's the most vulnerable. And we are so vulnerable when we allow the influences of Satan to take our minds off of the things and the ways of God. When we allow no room in our heart for growing the will of God. And when we come under the influence of the ways of men instead of the ways of God, we become the prey. We are the prey. We are the one that has strayed off to the side. We are the one that Satan is lurking in the bushes and looking at, waiting for just the right time. And if our attitude is such, if someone says to us, "Are you okay? How are you doing spiritually?" If we are the ones that say, "Well, you can't tell me what to do." Yes, people say that. They do. If we're the ones that say that, or if we're the ones that say, "You really can't tell me who to hang around with." Yes, people say those things. And if we hear those words coming from our lips, we better look at ourselves real careful. Because Satan already has a claw in us. And he has us where he wants us. The weak will be taken by Satan. Back to the Psalms. The 10th Psalm. The 10th Psalm. We're looking at the first 11 verses so here of this text. The psalmist begins by saying, "Lord, why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourselves in times of trouble?" And every time I read that, I'm sure there could be different reasons why that was said, but every time I read that, I'll tell you what comes to my mind. It's Paul, when he was preaching on Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17, said that God has made us in such a way that we might reach for him, we might grope for him, because he is not far off from each one of us. And yet here the psalmist is saying, "Lord, why do you stand far off?" Well, I'm just thinking here that God's not the one that moved away. But we've moved away from God. Verse 2. "In his arrogance the wicked man hunts down the weak, who are caught in the schemes he devises. He boasts of the cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride the wicked does not seek him. In all his thoughts there is no room for God. His ways are always prosperous. He is haughty, and your laws are far from him. He sneers at all his enemies. He says to himself, 'Nothing will shake me. I'll always be happy and never have trouble.' His mouth is full of curses and lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. He lies in wait near the villages. From ambush he murders the innocent, watching in secret for his victims. He lies in wait like a lion in cover. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He catches the helpless and drags them off in his net. His victims are crushed. They collapse. They fall under his strength. And he says to himself, 'God has forgotten.' He covers his face and never sees." Let me tell you something. God has not forgotten us. But God lets us go our own way. And if we move far away from God, and if that's our choice and we want to move away from God, he calls us. He calls us to come back. But he's going to let us walk away. What are we going to do? I mean, each one of us, we have to think about this. What are we going to choose to do? We can walk with God. We can walk with Satan. Best I can tell, those are the choices. That's the way in the direction of life. And Satan is waiting. We don't have to stray far off before Satan sees us, and he's just waiting. He's looking for the opportunity to pounce, and he will. He absolutely will. And it happens so fast. When we went walking with the lions, we walked for about an hour and a half out in the bush, and these lions came in and among us and jumped on the rocks and looked kind and sometimes just looked pretty. They jumped out and run around, come between us again, and we all stayed kind of close together, and I got to see what was going on because I was kind of hanging to the back of the crowd. I wasn't feeling well. You know, some days in the bush and some food, I wasn't feeling well. But I was staying close to the pride. But I was kind of watching what was going on. But somewhere along the line, I'd missed something really important. And one of the guides turned around, looking beyond me, says, young man, quickly, come back up here. I turned and looked, and Tad was about 30 feet behind us, and he was crouched down by some of these bushes, and he was taking a picture of the lion. And I could see it differently than he could. I could see the lion looking up over the bush, looking at Tad. Just that quickly. How did that lion circle around? When did he do that? And Tad was just separated from us for just the least amount of time. And that lion already saw him. And he was just waiting. Just like that. And if we don't think that's what Satan does, we better wake up. Because that's exactly what Satan does. And that's how he destroys us. Satan never fails to notice when we are weak. Satan never fails to notice when we are separated from those of like precious faith. He never fails to notice when we are not walking with others. And I'm so amazed how many Christians do not seek help and ask for encouragement when we are struggling in faith, and we all do. We all do. We all have those times, those days, those periods in life where things just aren't going just the best, and Satan knows that too. And there are just those times when we need to reach out to someone, or maybe to several brethren, and say, I'm having a hard time. I'm needing some help. I need some encouragement. I need some prayers. So that we can be strengthened, so that we can be tight with the group, so we can find safety and strength that comes from God in those of like precious faith. I mentioned already that sometimes you could notice tonight some who are not here. And you might be wondering where they are. And maybe you know. Maybe there's some that you already know that are just struggling. But there's great power that comes by our assembling together when we consider one another, as the Hebrew writer says, and to not forsake the assembling. And if we leave the strength of the group, we are easy prey. Because as we read, he lies in wait like a lion in cover. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He catches the helpless and drags them off in his net. That's what Satan does. And if we say, and if we think that that's not what happens, let's understand. We're arguing with God on that. Because God says that is what happens. Have you strayed from where real faith is found? Have you strayed from where there is encouragement? Salvation is found in Jesus. His death provides for us a way and a means to be in a relationship with God. Baptized believers whose sins are washed away. That's our hope. Jesus is calling those who have wandered away back to the fold. And he's still calling us back to safety. Do you need prayers of the brethren? Can you be helped spiritually? Would you let us know? Would you come as we stand in